In today's video, we're going to explore how to paint up more Legions of Chaos by painting up the Alpha Legion and Word Bearers.
Then the entirety of the cosmos is accessible through each and every individual's mind, connecting to the great mind, the great spirit.
Welcome back to the channel, collectors. This is the second part of the tutorial of how we can very quickly paint up our own Chaos Space Marines from the Nachmund Kill Team box set. In this video, we're going to paint up even more Chaos Space Marine Legions, continuing from the previous video right here, where I painted up the Black Legion, the Khorne Berserker, as well as a Slaanesh aligned Emperor's Children. In this video, we're going to paint up some Chaos Undivided Space Marines, such as the very sneaky Alpha Legion, as well as the very dedicated Word Bearers. So before we begin painting these Chaos Space Marines, why don't you pay the class fee of 1 like and 1 sub so that we can keep going. Remember, we have new videos every Wednesday, so you don't want to miss this out. So without further ado, let's move on to the first segment where I'll be showing you guys how to very quickly paint up the very sneaky Alpha Legion and its blue-green armor right now. Alright, so this is a quick recap of what I've done for the airbrush stage. I've done the airbrush stage very similarly for all the Chaos Space Marines. So I'm just spraying like a blue undertone with an orange highlight. This orange highlight will help accentuate the eventual layers, but it might not seem as obvious as this airbrushing stage right now, but it's totally relevant. Okay, so this is the Alpha Legion and these are some of the other Space Marines airbrushed and ready to go. Okay, so next up I'm going to be using turquoise and I'm going to use this as a glaze. So as you can see, once you spray on the base colors, some of the warmth from the previous airbrushing stage is already lost. However, just don't be worried, it's just my particular way of painting so that I don't lose out on the possibility of having the warmth back in the highlight areas in the subsequent stages. So next up, I'm going to be using blue-green as a even further highlight. Right here, what I can recommend is you should reduce your airbrush pressure so that you can spray a little bit more precise, and you just want to be doing this all in a similar direction. I'm doing this from the top right direction. So in a sense, I'm doing the zenithal highlighting over and over again to reinforce and continuously build onto the highlight that I have already created in the previous stages. So next up, I'm going to be moving on to an extreme highlight. I'm going to be using a little bit of pastel peach here. So I'm trying to reinstall a little bit of the warmth that I've lost from the previous layers. As you can see, the previous layers are blue, green and turquoise, tend to be really cool colors. However, with a little bit of pastel peach in it, I'm sure that this will really bring up the warmth back into the Alpha Legion's armor right here. So next up, I'm going to be using a little bit of Luminous Flash. Why did I choose Luminous Flash is because the AK Flash tone range tends to be a little bit more towards the orange side, and the Luminous Flash is actually a very high value desaturated orange. With a lower pressure and slightly more dilute paint, I can very precisely spray on highlights, even though my airbrush is just a 0.5 airbrush. Next up, I'm going to be doing some base coating. I'm going to be doing the trims and all the metal parts in oily steel. I find that oily steel is really nice because there's a tint of yellow in it. Sort of like a dirty metal, which of course is very fitting for Chaos Space Marine that has been doing battle for the past 10,000 years or so. At this stage, you just want to do this as neatly as possible and you don't want to ruin your very beautiful airbrush stage. So right here, I'm just going to be using Noun Oil. This video is a little bit older as you can see because I have not discovered enamel paints yet. However, if you are going to be using enamel paints, any dark black or grey enamel paints will do just fine. You just want to wash over so that you get a black lining for all the parts in between the silvers and the turquoises. Next up, I'm just going to be cleaning up a little bit of the highlights. And I'm just going to make sure that none of the metals go into the turquoise areas. Just being very careful and placing some highlights where they should be, usually in the raised areas or where it's facing the light. So next up is the most extreme highlights. I'm going to be using AK silver to do a little bit of edge highlighting. I find that using the silver to do a bit of edge highlighting really brings out the little details and the little forms that you might otherwise have missed if you did not pay attention. And this is the result of the metallic paints. So now with the blue-green armor of the Alpha Legion complete, we're going to complement this with a little bit of warm glow from the plasma rifle. Next up, we're going to learn how to do the object source lighting on the plasma rifle. Are you ready? Let's go! Alright, here comes the fun part. We're going to do some object source lighting here, and I'm going to be using a little bit of burn red to establish where the red glow has influenced. So from the plasma gun, I would say the red glow influences a little bit of the Space Marine's head, a little bit of his armor, and you don't want to overdo this stage because you still want to make sure that the Marine still has as much turquoise as possible. Next up, I'm going to be using a little bit of blood red. I find that blood red is a really good choice because it's very high value and very high saturation. It allows the glow to look very convincing. You need this high value and high saturation mid-tone so that you can achieve this very convincing glow. Otherwise, you just look a little bit washed out. Next on, I'm going to be using a wash. As you can see, there are a lot of colors here. I spent a bit of time just trying to make sure that I can achieve as high a value and as high a saturation orange as possible, and these are the colors that I have been using. Just doing it as a wash and making sure that the glow is in between the rails. As you can see, just with a nice little wash, the capillary action really allows you to create this very convincing OSL effect where the plasma weapon is actually glowing from within the gun rather than glowing through the plasma coils itself. There we have it. Next up, I'm going to be using Luminous Flash once more. As I mentioned, Luminous Flash is a very high value orange that kind of retains a little bit of that orangeness. And right here you can see it actually appears as white. Because it's so desaturated, it appears a bit as white. However, I like it that it retains a little bit of orange. So next up, I'm going to be using a little bit of edge highlighting, a bit of luminous orange, dead red, and dark sea grey. I'm going to be just picking on the forms of the face to show where the glow is affecting the most. Notice that I used a little bit of dark sea grey in this so that I can knock down the value just a little bit so that it doesn't overpower the plasma glow that I painted previously. So next up, a little bit of luminous flash. This luminous flash is used very selectively just to really pick out the sharpest edges and pick on some of the forms. However, that is not used very liberally, as you can see right here. And there we have it. This is the Alpha Legion with his very bright plasma glow from the side of his plasma gun. So next on, we're going to be painting some word bearers. So in contrast with the Khorne Berserker, which also is dressed in red armor, we're going to be painting up some word bearers. The difference between the word bearers as well as the Khorne Berserkers would be the color temperature of the armor. The word bearers tend to have a cooler red armor, closer towards purple, sort of like a wine red. Alright, ready? Let's get painting the armor on the word bearers right now. So same as before, we have already done the blues and the oranges. Now I'm just going to go over with wine red. Notice that I'm using wine red rather than the warmer reds that I've used in the Khorne Berserker. This is how we differentiate the different legions, and this is how I like to paint my word bearers. So next up, moving on, a little bit of wine red, a little bit of luminous flash, just for the very select highlights. This will really wash out the marine, so later you will need to go over the entire marine with a glaze. Notice here that this marine is starting to look a little bit more pink. Don't worry about it because we're just trying to push the values as extreme as possible before we go over the glaze that will knock everything back down. So going over with a glaze of wine red once more. I've thinned this down a little bit more than usual just to make sure that it's a glaze, and then just spraying this from a long distance so that it evenly coats the entire model. As you can see, you just want to slowly and gradually build up the saturation on the model right here. Next up, I'm going to be using a little bit of burn red to reinstall some of the shadows. And I'm just spraying this from a reverse zenithal angle, sort of like minus 45 degrees from the bottom. And this is how I have achieved a really quick cool red armor. Next up, I'm going to be using oily steel. This is going to be the same stages as I've done for the Alpha Legion. Just want to do this as carefully as possible so that you don't ruin your very beautiful wine red armor that you have already done before this stage. I really don't recommend trying to go back to fix the wine red, because once you've used an airbrush, it's really hard to clean up the mess if you have already done so. So if you know that it's going to be really hard to clean it up, yes, of course, be a little bit more careful and be a little bit more neat. Next up, I'm going to be using Noun oil. Noun oil is going to be used all over the marine just to establish some part separation. As you can see, I've also applied some decals. Because the word bearers tend to have scribbles all over their armor, you just want to make sure that you might want to apply some of that script decal onto the model as well. So next up, just adding in a little bit of silver, I'm going to be doing the edge highlighting. Just remember where your main light sources are coming from and just pick on the metal details from there. And your word bearer marines will be just fine. So I really hope that you found this quick speed paint of the Chaos Space Marines from the Nachmund really useful, and we shall see the final results in just a little bit. Remember, like and subscribe because I will be painting a display level Chaos Space Marine very soon. And there we have it. This is the word bearers after the decals have been applied, and I think he is looking pretty fine and he looks distinctly different from the Khorne Berserker. Oh, you're still here! Thanks for watching all the way to the end. I guess you might have found this video useful, so if you could, give me one like and one sub, that would be really helpful. Or if you want to help the channel even further, head on to the Patreon and become a patron. I'd like to thank my patrons for allowing me to do this, and I hope to see you in the next Kill Team Nachmund painting video. See you!